Good evening. My name is Cale Moffat. I'm information literacy librarian here at St. Martin's University in Lacey, Washington, which is in the Olympia area. Tonight I'm making this short little video about systems of social oppression and social privilege. But before I do this, I need to acknowledge my positionality in this system. I'm white, cisgender male, born in the United States. English is my primary language. I'm generally Christian. And I live on the lands of the Squally Upsh, now called the Nisqually Indian tribe. It's my hope that in making this video that I can prompt others, especially those who look a little bit more like me, to start thinking about systems of social oppression and privilege in the hopes that we will act to make things more just and equitable. Thank you. This is the sound of a cargo ship's engines. When we were in our 20s, one of my best friends did some contract video work for the U.S. Navy at Point Mugu near Oxnard in Southern California. His assignments included several voyages on Navy ships, and once he talked to me about the sound of the engines. He said the sound of the engines is incessant and can be kind of disconcerting. He told me that on one of the voyages he asked one of the sailors about the sounds, and the sailor laughed and said something like, "Oh, you can still hear them?" Then he explained that he had just gotten so used to it that he didn't really hear the engines anymore. My friend said that after a day or two, he would get to the point where the sound didn't bother him as much, but he still had to speak quite loudly, and the feel of the engine's vibrations could be a bit of a strain. When he came home from these trips, he had a moderately sore throat, seemed exhausted, and sometimes took a day or two to get back to his usual self. As I have learned more about social justice, I have made a connection between what Dr. Leticia Nieto calls the rank machine and my friend's shipbound experiences. The rank machine refers to a systematized separation of persons and communities into insiders and outsiders based on broad social categories such as gender, race, ethnicity, religious groups, nationality, etc. We are assigned to insider and outsider groups based on factors that we cannot control, like skin color, hair texture, genitals, our primary language, where we were born, etc. Like the sound and vibrations on a ship, the rank machine runs constantly. The rank machine does not, nor can it, care about individuals. This is the reason Dr. Nieto used the metaphor of a machine. Picture huge gears, chains, and pulleys, or factory conveyor belts, chutes, and funnels, she wrote. The rank machine assigns different value to different groups and provides us with scripts that direct others how to regard us and treat us, and scripts that tell us how we should regard and treat others. In complex societies like countries with their legal and economic systems, along with industries and institutions like education, systems of religion, etc., the rank system is primarily maintained by laws, procedures, norms, doctrines, codes of conduct, contracts, historical narratives, etc., which create abstract forms of social, cultural, and economic violence that maintain social relationships to the advantage of social insiders and the disadvantage of social outsiders. It also has no problem resorting to physical violence. Dr. Nieto points out that the rank machine not only acts upon us, but also acts through us. Think of times when we may have used racially or sexually charged language to prompt friends to, quote, get back in line. I'm terribly embarrassed to acknowledge that when I was younger, a common way to tell a boy to act more masculinely was to tell him to stop acting like a girl. Unfortunately, during my time as a high school teacher, it seems this tactic is still alive and well. I heard plenty of young men and women use the similar phrases to check each other. Statements like this enforce rigid and traditional notions of masculinity and femininity, sending a clear message that masculinity is valued over femininity. Additionally, statements and sentiments like this enact gender-based symbolic violence against the target, relying on a kind of humiliation. In extreme cases, though, this kind of language may escalate and even lead to violence if the target is perceived as being gay, aggressively reasserting the norm of heterosexuality over queerness. Many of us are like the sailor my friend talked to about the ship's noise. If we are born into some forms of social advantage, like being cis male or female, being male, having US citizenship, being white, etc., we probably never hear the engines, so to speak. As a matter of fact, we can be punished if we hear the sound and call attention to it or act in ways that alert others to it. In the past, white persons who supported civil rights were sometimes called things like the N word lover, were subject to social punishment like losing their jobs or social isolation, and in many cases were even beaten or killed because they supported equality, because they heard the sound of the engines and tried to act against it. This continues to be the case. During the 2020 Black Lives Matter marches here in Olympia, Washington, for example, I had firearms brandished at me by white persons because I was marching with sisters and brothers of color. I was even asked by another white man, "What are you even doing out here? You're not black." While those of us who are social insiders can afford to not hear or pay attention to the sound of the engines, persons in communities who are made outsiders by the rank machine have no choice. In fact, being aware of it can be the difference between life and death. To cite a tragic incident that is still relatively recent, painful, and instructive, in 1998, a University of Wyoming student named Matthew Shepard was approached by two young men at the Fireside Lounge in Laramie. They posed as queer men, apparently knowing that Shepard was gay, and offered to give him a ride home, but instead, they kidnapped him, took him outside of town, and killed him. He paid for being an outsider in the rank machine with his life. Of course, this may sound like an extreme example, but considering that rates of violent crime are higher against queer persons, persons of color, indigenous persons, women, immigrants, etc., than they are against corresponding social insiders, Shepard's murder was actually characteristic of the rank machine, if only a bit rarer manifestation of it. Much of the violence directed at social outsiders is far more subtle and even accepted as normal in everyday life, since it is primarily social or cultural. If we are actually serious about working towards a more just world and to living up to the high ideals of equity and compassion that we publicly proclaim, then those of us who are defined as insiders, socially speaking, have to become more attuned to the sound of the engines, so to speak, and develop a better sense of how it signifies injustice against others.